الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. وأشهد أنه الله الذي لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له إله واحدا ورب شاهدا ونحن له مسلمون. وأشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله الله بالهدى والدين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. أما بعد، يا عباد الله إني أوصيكم ونفسي إياي بتقوى الله. One of the wisdoms that it is a requirement in the Friday sermon that we remind and we join each other to taqwa is because of the importance of taqwa. Taqwa is one of these words that is very difficult to translate. If we translate it simply as the fear of God, that it doesn't properly convey the range of meanings that are included in this word. And this is often the case when you try to translate a very deep Semitic language like Arabic that is built upon a trilateral root system into an Indo-European language like English, as that oftentimes is that you have things that you miss when you try to translate these key words. But this concept, taqwa, or its reality rather, is something very important to the Muslim life. It is the wasiyah of Allah to the awwaleen and the akhirin, is that this is God's advice to those people who came before and those people who will always remain until the end of time. And ultimately that this is about decision making. When we talk about taqwa, when we talk about what we're going to roughly translate as God consciousness or piety, if you will, that ultimately gets back to decision making. And in every single moment of our lives is that we are constantly being put in a position whereby which do we have to make decisions. And the decisions that we make will ultimately determine that who we are as a human being. Is that your decisions will ultimately determine how you are as a human being, because is that we are not necessarily taking into account for the genetics part of the story. Because if you look at the human being's psychological profile, that we are a combination of that genetics, DNA, who we are, things that we did not have any part in. That we are also that we are our experiences that made us who we are today. So everything from the past. And then we are also that the decisions that we make, the voluntary decisions that we make, this is collectively that all a part of our psychological profile, these three dimensions. You have the DNA, you have the past experiences, and then you have the decisions that you make as a human being. And from the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that what we're taking into account for is the third dimension. And that it is intertwined, however, with the first two. But from this platform and from this basis, that it is important for us to understand that the true nature of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may the peace and blessing of God be upon him, insofar as it relates to decision making, insofar it relates to action. Because that when we think about religion, that we might think of a number of different things. And unfortunately, one of the first things that doesn't come to mind, that when we think about religion for many people, is character traits. And I'm speaking to the Muslim community at this point. Is that we might think of prayer, that we might think of giving, we might think of a number of different images that come to our mind when we think of a quote-unquote religious person. But in reality is that the very first thing that should come to mind, that when we think about religion and if we think about someone who is that deeply into the religion, is character. And this is the proof of this is that the verse in the Quran that we've all heard from the time that we're young, where Allah Ta'ala, that He speaks and He addresses the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him. وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلَقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Indeed that you are upon a great character. And we know is that the rhetoric of the Quran is that very important. It is through understanding that rhetoric that we can start to unpack many of the meanings that underlie each verse of God's book. And that if we look at the particle that was used here, it is from what are called the haruf al-jar, that puts something into the genitive case. But here, ala literally means upon. It's a harf al-isti'la. So that if I would talk about this bottle of water, as I would say in Arabic, that arudat al-ma' ala al-tawila, or ala al-manassa, or whatever, that it is on top of the table. Ala is used for that something being on top of something else. And that whenever that we associate outwardly that something be on top of something else, is that there's a power relationship there. In other words, is that there is control that underlies if someone is on top, and we actually use that he's on top of things, or that meaning that he's in control of his way of doing things. And so we think of that the relationship of the top to the bottom, one of the meanings is that of control. So it's as if that God is saying in reference to his prophet, is that that character to be like a platter that is on a table, is that you are, O Muhammad, that on top of that. And that the idea being that if you are on top of something, is that you are fully in control of it. And that we tend to forget that our Prophet said, and there's actually a number of hadith, and it would be interesting to write at least an article, preferably a book on this, when our Prophet used the word innama, which also is a very important construct in Arabic grammar that restricts the meaning to something. So when our Prophet says, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, that indeed that I have only been sent. This is how you translate the innama, to perfect noble character, to complete noble character. And if we look closely at what our Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that he didn't say that to create noble character or to bring about noble character. He said utammima, li'utammima, in order to complete or to perfect. And that could be understood in a number of different ways. One of them being is that we have from the bounty of God a natural disposition, that we have a way that we were created, that even though that in a theological discussion of right and wrong, is that Muslim theologians debated that do we intuit all knowledge of right and wrong, or does true knowledge of right and wrong come directly from God? That's a theological debate, but despite that debate, it just so happens is that the majority of things that we know to be good or bad, to be right or wrong, are also intuitive. It's things that we already know. In other words, is that it exists within us. There's this natural capacity that we have. That when you do something good, and a sociologist could say that, oh, this is something that you just learn. This is something that is taught in society. And I've never been fully convinced that that's the full story. Because there seems to be something deeper within the human being. That insofar as that we are religious beings, and that we have a desire to know and for meaning that we feel fulfilled. When this is the case, there seems to be something deeper. That it's something about our internal makeup, if someone believes that there is such a thing. And indeed, all religious perspectives point to the reality of an internal nature, an internal reality of the human being. And so if this is the case, what our Prophet is saying, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لِيُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, that this natural, intuitive ability that we have to know right and to know wrong, is that he came to complete it. So what does it mean in that context? It means that natural ability that he has, that he wants to give it a religious identity, if you will. That he wants to give it a religious frame. In other words, is that he wants to give it an ability to rise, and in order for us to be able to benefit from it ourselves and for others also to benefit from it. Because there are many people that have good character traits, and our Prophet is that he used to praise people of good traits, whether or not they believed in Islam or not. He used to praise people at times that are from the pre-Islamic period. And thus is that this is why, is that character is one of these things, like something like reason or the mind and the intellect, is it creates this common platform whereby that we can judge a number of different things. Character is indeed one of these things. And so our Prophet is giving us, through the religion of Islam, a way to not only understand but to embody and then benefit from having good character, because it is essential to the religious life. There is no way to actualize the meanings of the Quran. And what Allah Ta'ala says is that He only created jinn and humankind in order that they may know Him without having good character. It is impossible. That having worship is not enough. That were worship to be enough, then Satan, who is the archetype of evil, that would have been the closest of people to God, and he was banished quite precisely because of his lack of character. He did not have integrity at the level that when he was commanded to do something, his disease of his heart prevented him from doing so. And thus that we take from this is that if we want to understand the touchstone, in other words, the measure of someone's religion, is that it really gets back to character. It gets back to character. And there's no way to understand the life story of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ until we know a lot, not just a little, about character and what comprises character and how that relates to you and I in the decision-making process that we go through and the things that we choose by virtue of our freedom of choice. It all gets back to character. And that when we understand this clearly, is that we can understand then and then get out of the confusion that many people fall into in separating that principle from the actions of a particular individual. And that this is the religious quest ultimately is about principle, living up to a standard. But part of the tribulation of our time is that we're living in a time where not only are people calling to good, are only people not calling to good and forbidding evil, is that we live in a time where people's understanding of what good and evil is has been toppled over and turned upside down. And then what ends up happening as a result of that is that you find people that calling to evil and actually preventing the good. That we live in a time where in realities have become inverted. And it's very difficult to have the necessary critical thinking skills to be able to sift through much of the framed discourse that you will probably, if you have a class today, that once you enter into that classroom, be exposed to. It's very difficult to be able to read a newspaper or to pick up a magazine and to read an article in that magazine and be able to sift through the framed nature of that discourse, let alone that when it reaches its pinnacle in certain television programs and news segments and people that we listen to, that wherever they might be, is that we need to have these thinking skills to be able to see through that and to be able to understand truth as truth is. And that we have, as all beliefs do, certain underlying assumptions that must be in place for us to understand things correctly. And one of the greatest underlying assumptions that we have in our approach to our religion is that character in and of itself is an end. This is an assumption that underlies our approach to our religion. Character is an end in and of itself. It is not a means for something else. Yes, that there is that benefits that you get from having good character, but that is not why that we have good character. Because we're required to have good character even if it means that you're going to put yourself in a perilous situation where you might lose your job, where you might lose a friend. You're still required and especially required. And as we go through life, we will all go through the vicissitudes of life. Do not think that you're going to have a rosy life. There was an author by the name of Guy Eaton, many of you probably heard of him. He wrote a really interesting book called That Remembering God. And he tells an anecdote in that book of a friend that he used to have. And he says that this person, that he always had an easy life, that he never really got sick, that he always had a lot of wealth. And he went on and on and on explaining this individual's life, and it's almost like leading you to the point of like, oh wow, we all would like to live like that, wouldn't we? And then that he says at the end of the story, and he leads you up, he says, this was the most immature person that I ever met in my entire life. In other words, that there's something about going through experiences, that you come out a different person. There's something about going through tribulation that you learn. There's something about being burned that you learn, okay, I'm not going to do that next time. Experience is very important. And our Prophet in general, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that he encouraged us to be with older people. He encouraged us to sit sa'ilul ulama. We should ask the scholars. Wajalisul kubara. and that we should sit with elderly people. And why did our Prophet encourage us to sit with elderly people? Because of the wisdom that you all get, that we all get from sitting with elderly people. And unfortunately, with the breakdown of the nuclear family and the extended family all living together, that many of your parents or your parents' parents that lived in times where the extended family lived together, that was certainly the case until fairly recently. Even with the death of my grandmother and grandfather, to some extent, that was still intact. That they immigrated from Germany in the mid-19th century, and they all pretty much lived in the same place for several generations, that in Kansas, and then eventually that people started to move away. But there's something to be said for that. When I was visiting a place in the Middle East, and my father was with me, that we were in a house, and it was a big house, and there was 39 people who lived in this one house. We think of that as odd because of the way our houses are set up. But the way houses are set up, oftentimes in traditional cultures, is that it is expected, is that the man who has the family that has children, is that most often than not, is that the male children, that their wives would move into the house, as scary as that might sound in our context, and that they'll build like another room, and they have their own separate bathroom, and there's common space where everyone shares. But there's a lot of actually good in that if you think about that. That 39 people under one roof is that you had the great-grandmother, you had the parents, and then you had that his 4 or 5 male children, and all of them except one were married, and most of them had kids. So first of all, that your children, that have a whole bunch of people to play with, even before going outside. That secondly, you have plenty of babysitters, from the older children to the aunts and the uncles and everyone else. Thirdly, and most importantly, getting back to the point what we're trying to make here, is that what is that child growing up getting when they sit with the great-grandmother, when they sit with the grandfather and the grandmother, when they sit with their father and mother or their aunts and their uncles, and then what are they also getting from the older and the younger children? They're getting a plethora of stories and experience that all is going into creating a healthy person. And I think that a lot of the chaos of the modern world can be tied back to now. It's not perfect, and I don't want to over-romanticize this type of thing. But my point here in saying is there's something that you get from elderly people because of experiences that they grow through. There's something about experiences is that they change you, they make you, and they give you an ability to attain a higher degree of maturity. And there is a direct correlation between just life maturity and religious and spiritual maturity. And that if you can learn to put the two together, is that you will find that you benefit in great ways. But oftentimes we see this disconnect. And that what I'm really trying to get at is that the way that we experience life and we go through various tribulations is that we will have a number of opportunities in life to have friends that we take on, but we will also have a number of situations and circumstances that we're placed in where we have involuntary friendships. There's no way for you to get out of this situation. That you graduate from Rutgers, that you go on and you start working for a company, and your boss simply does not like you, and he wants to make your life miserable. And it might not be an option for you to say, okay, I'm going to move on and get a job somewhere else. What do you do in that particular situation? That you get married and you have a horrible relationship, and that you fight all the time with your spouse. Or you grow up in a household where your parents were always fighting. Or there's a problem with your brother or sister or whatever it might be. You will be in situations, whether it's at work or at home or your future spouse, or then if your spouse is fine, there might be something that happens with your children or your friends. There will be a number of situations that you're in where you're in involuntary relationships, meaning that you can't get out of them unless that it reaches a point where there's harm being inflicted on you, and then legally you have to distance yourself. But aside from that you have to still maintain that relationship. How are you going to respond in that moment? How are you going to respond that when you all of a sudden might have to compromise your principles that your parents spent so long trying to ingrain in you when you become a mature adult and you're making your own decisions? What I'm trying to get at is that this is all about character. Because we think character oftentimes is this very impractical, that abstract thing. That it's quite the opposite. That it is who you are. Your character is who you are.
And your character directly relates to the 3 stages of the nafs, your soul, which is also who you are. And that either any one of us is in any one given 3 states at any given time. That we're still either fighting and at the lower state of the soul where there's a lot of dissonance and turbulence and turbidity of the soul. Or that we're starting to work with that and where we're trying to become that more pure. But it's only the 3rd and highest degree, what's known as the nafs al-mutma'inna, the tranquil soul, where all of a sudden things start to settle down. And the way that we respond to these various vicissitudes of life, that is in a way that is pleasing to God and His Messenger and is according to the highest ethical standard. And there's a baseline response of permissibility. And then there is an endless best response scenario of any given situation that we're in. There's no limit to the degree to which that we can respond with what is known as ihsan, which is simply doing goodness, excellence in the world. This is ihsan. And the Quranic standard that it is simultaneously one that sets the limits that relate to law. And at the same time, is that it says that what is the best and highest course of action to take. And oftentimes when we think about relationships, if we get down to the level of law, this is a big mistake. Is that when we talk about and do a course on marriage, which is usually the ones that are always attended, is that we talk about it oftentimes as rights. And that's very problematic. Is that rights relate to that if something goes wrong, you take it to a judge, and that's what they judge based upon that the rights as they're listed in a book. Is that relationships, if they're about rights, they're not going to work. Is it a relationship that is much beyond rights? It's about showing goodness. And if we want to have sustainable relationships, whatever those relationships might be, spousal or otherwise, friends or otherwise, is that it's only really to the degree of ihsan, of excellence that we show. Is that will that relationship that be maintained? The bond of a relationship is ihsan. It is excellence. But it gets back to this idea of character. And what is then the essential definition of character? Character itself is very profound, and we have a very sophisticated, developed, ethical theory of character, as that our scholars painstakingly that worked out for us over centuries. It didn't happen overnight. It was a part of all, if you take a class on the history of Islam, it's a part of the whole translation movement that happened in the early Abbasid Empire. And that everything that we inherited from the wisdom of the ancients, in particular, the Greek ethics and the way that it was synthesized into Islam. And then here comes along someone like Ragib al-Asfahani, who asserts many of the same conclusions that the likes of Aristotle and others did that centuries before him. And then after him comes Imam al-Azadi, who takes it even further. And then after him comes Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, who takes it even further. And these are just 3 examples, but in reality there was hundreds, if not thousands, of people taking part in this process, teaching us what is then the reality of character, so we can have a theoretical framework. And the benefit of then understanding that is that you start to notice these tendencies in yourself. If you don't have any knowledge of them, you're just acting and reacting and you don't understand why. And knowing yourself is very important. Knowing yourself is actually very, very important. Because if you do not know yourself, you will not know your Lord. Knowing yourself is critical. And that we all have aspects of ourselves that we can't see, not just physically, because I can't see how my back looks if I have a mole or whatever it is. I have to look in the mirror to see what's on my back, not only physically, but we also have blind spots. And if you put a dot on a paper, there's a particular point. If you get it close enough to your eyes, it apparently disappears, but it's there. So we are prone to self-deception. We are prone by our nature to not seeing certain sides of ourselves. And that this is why we have to understand that there's a standard, though. There is an ethical theory that we can learn, that we can put our behavior and our past history, our entire psychological profile up to see where we're at. But we have to be convinced about what I've been trying to convince you of, is that your character will determine what you are. Our Prophet said, ad-din al-mu'amala. The entire religion is your interactions with others. When you go through the vicissitudes of life, collectively, over your life's course, and the decisions that you make based upon the places that you're put in will determine who you are. Much more so than the way that you pray your 5 daily prayers. And in fact, that they are interconnected, because you can't not have good character and expect to then stand up before your Lord and have concentration in your prayer. They go hand in hand. But character is this touchstone. This is what it is all about. And it is always amazing to me that people can think that we have this idea and we've inherited this idea, and part of it is the nature of the secular world that we live in, that it's somewhat uncomfortable talking about religion in the public sphere. So we have to have this compartmentalized lifestyle where, okay, I'm going to go to work and just act normal and just kind of pretend just to be as everyone else is and do what I got to do because I got to put food on the table. And then, when I go to the mosque at night or every Friday and I come to this Friday prayer, I'm all of a sudden going to be religious. That this is a negligent approach to religion. Is that true religion, that help you in every single moment of your life. True religion will not be easy. True religion will actually be very difficult because it requires is that you make tough decisions. It requires that if you're in a particular situation, is that there's nothing I can do here except to be patient. And patience is bitter. There's situations that you will be in where there's nothing that I can do in the situation except to have what's called ihtimal. Just bear the situation. And that's the right thing to do in that time. That there's times that you will be in where there's nothing that you can do except to respond in a way that your nafs, your lower soul, does not want to respond. But that's the essence of religion. And that's the essence of true religion. And that's the essence of true religion insofar as it relates to character. Is that learning not everything that you want to do is what you should do. Especially at the lower degrees of purity of the soul. And in fact, that the sign that you don't want to do it oftentimes is the sign that you actually should do it. Or if you do want to do it, that you actually shouldn't do it. But this is a whole process of learning to take ourselves to account. As the great Umar bin al-Khattab that he said, "Hasibu anfusukum qabla an tuhasabu." Take yourselves to account before you're taken to account. That wazinu a'malakum qabla an tuzanu. That take your deeds and weigh them before that they are actually, literally, physically, in reality, weighed right before your eyes. And this is why it's important to be that introspective, and that we should be self-critical, and that we have a religion that is built upon being self-critical. And that, unfortunately, this is not the common discourse that you find. Is that in situations, yes, where Muslims are being victimized, there's nothing wrong with speaking out and standing for justice. However, is that we also need to ask ourselves, why am I in the situation that I'm in? And what can I do about it? What have I done to contribute to this? Is that there is nothing more empowering than being self-critical, than taking your own self to task and relating the results of that process of introspection to character. And taking yourself, how did I act in such and such a situation? I knew it was wrong to do this, but I did it anyway because I was scared. That if I didn't do this, I was going to lose my job. Or if I didn't do this, that this person was not going to like me. That this is not that we should be people of principle. That if something's right, we do it regardless of what anyone thinks about that thing or what anyone's going to say about that thing. Right is right, and if we believe in a right, then we have to stand up for that right. And then if we believe that something is a part of character, we have to do that. And you will find, from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that if you do this, is that Allah ta'ala, He will give you a way out. He will open up doors for you to be as you are, in the way that if you're doing what is right, He will open up doors for you that you thought never would ever possibly open up, that you thought would only close. But character is this essential element that without it, there is no reality to the religion. There is no reality to the religion. And unfortunately that we live in a time where there are people that are doing things in the name of Islam there's such heinous crimes that to even call them irreligious is a misnomer. Is that they are simply nothing other than inhumane. And that your own self, your body, your human nature, that in and of itself, that it has to be that proper when you are given religion in order to respond to any situation correctly. In other words, is that you will interpret your religion. And if people are operating on a subhuman level, is that they will interpret the religion, or whatever it is for that matter, an ideology or philosophy or whatever it is, according to the base elements of who they are as a human being. The two go hand in hand. May God all make us people of character and recognize its importance. وقولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولجميع المسلمين فاستغفروه انه غفور رحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته الأكرمين والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وأشهد أنه الله الذي لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا محمد عبده ورسوله. أما بعد يا عباد الله إني أوصيكم ونفسي إياي بتقوى الله. Alhamdulillah, that our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He has given us that many opportunities, and the doors of His mercy are open. And one of the greatest things that we can do is expose ourselves to the sweet breezes of God's mercy. And that we do this by a simultaneous process of deep understanding of the nature of the time in which we live in any given time. And secondly, by directing our heart towards Him. That when we talk about realizing this religion, which is the most important thing that should be on the mind of a Muslim, how can I realize my iman? How can I realize ihsan? How can I realize ihsanat? So that we're not just talking words, but we're living the reality of this religion. This is the single most difficult thing to do in our time, because our Prophet informed us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that there will come a time, is that people will gather together and eat from us the way that people gather together to eat from a plate. And the companions asked the Messenger of Allah that, will we be many on that day, O Messenger, or will we be a few? And the Prophet said, will we be a few on that day, O Messenger, or will we be many? And the Prophet said that, no, that you will be many. But you will be like Rutgers said, that you will be like the refuse that comes when a flash flood that comes through. And if you've ever lived in a desert climate, that you might have seen what happens is that everything's dry and barren, and then the rains come, but because the earth does not absorb the water, is that you'll find it floods, and then it carries with it a bunch of refuse. In other words, is that our Prophet indicated that Muslims will be many in number, but they won't have substance. And you can't have substance unless that you really be a person of character. Character is what's going to give you substance. And all of these various virtues, the outward, but also the inward virtues of character. And that as Muslims, that we affirm the cardinal virtues, and that we believe is that each cardinal virtue relates to a particular faculty that we have within us. And when each one is balanced in and of itself, and balanced in relation to the others, there's a lot of details of how that works, is that we will be granted the four cardinal virtues, and that to the extent that we have those four cardinal virtues will be to the extent that we have all other virtues and all other character traits. And then all of that leads to that what is beyond what we know as a quote-unquote character trait. It is a mystical trait of the heart that God gives us to be people of repentance, to be people of hope and fear and patience and gratitude, and that to renounce this world and to trust in God, and have all of this lead to a deep love and ultimately contentment. That this comes as a result of this whole process, and that this is what ultimately life is all about, is that we're here to do all of this so that we can come to know Him. And my only parting advice is that in a time where people are attempting to hijack the reality of your religion, is that do not let people do that. No matter what people say on either side of the story, is it no? Is it the purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Prophet Muhammad, the purpose He sent the Prophet Jesus, the purpose He sent the Prophet Moses, the Prophet Noah, Prophet Adam, all of the prophets, the 25 of which that we know have come to us in the Quran, and the many other thousands of prophets that we don't know about, that we don't know them by names. All of these prophets were sent for the same exact reason, so you and I can know God. That is the purpose of God sending prophets, is it so that we can come to know Him. And do not let anyone steal that from you. Do not let anyone take that from being your primary reason that you approach your faith is ultimately about knowing God. Yes, part of that is giving back and being in service and standing for justice, but all of that is secondary and will only be true and real to the extent as that we are actively seeking the first. This is the whole purpose of religion. And do not ever, ever let anyone take that away from you. Because if they take that from you, that they've taken away the most underlying, fundamental, most beautiful part of the entire religion that is exemplified in our Prophet ﷺ's final moments of life. Is that the angel of death came to him and gave him a choice. And as long as the Prophet had adab sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that as long as that the angel hadn't come, that he's here and he has a mission, and he's here to convey. But as soon as the angel came to him and gave him a choice on whether he would remain or return to God, that he wanted to return to the highest companion, he wanted to return to his Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. And some have said, is that one interpretation, أَشَدُّ النَّاسِ بَلَاءً الْأَنْبِيَاء, is that those who receive that the most tribulation are the prophets. Is that some of them says that the greatest tribulation of our Prophet amongst all of the other tribulations was the fact is that he had a humanly perfect knowledge of God in a combined and related to that, a love for God that no other human being had had. That he, to remain here in this world and to fulfill his mission, while that is his internal state of wanting to be in the presence of his Lord, that some say that was his greatest tribulation of all, despite all of the others. To actually still be here with people when you have that level of knowledge and love of God subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what religion is all about. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala realize us in this. Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما باركت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. ورضي الله تعالى عن سادتنا الخلفاء الراشدين أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي وعلى جميع سادتنا الصحابة الكرام وأهل بيت رسول الله المطهرين من الأرجاس وعلينا معهم فيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات المسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم وحد صفوف المسلمين يا أول الأولين يا آخر الآخرين يا ذي القوة المتين ويا رحم المساكين. أنجز لنا رحمة من عندك نسعد بها في الدنيا والآخرة. آواكم الله نصركم الله. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروا على نعمه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر.